Welcome to this Authors in Conversation panel featuring the 2025 Minnesota Book Awards finalists in the competitive children's literature category. The Minnesota Book Awards is a program of the Friends of the St. Paul Public Library in the organization's capacity as the Minnesota Center for the Book. This year's Book Awards are sponsored by Education Minnesota. My name is Cori Doerrfeld, author illustrator of several books for children, including two Minnesota Book Award winners, The Rabbit Listened and Beneath. For this latest installment of the Minnesota Book Awards popular Meet the Finalists series, I am pleased to be joined by David LaRochelle, author of Mr. Fox's Game of No, illustrated by Mike Wohnoutka and published by Candlewick Press. Kalia Yang, author of The Rock in My Throat, illustrated by Jie Lin and published by Carolrhoda Books, Lerner Publishing Group. Latchana Kenney, author of Snow Steps, illustrated by Irina Evgastanovich and published by WorthyKids Hachette Book Group. Cristina Oxtra, author of What Lolo Wants, illustrated by Jamie Bauza and published by Kids Can Press. Congratulations to each of you for the MNBA finalist nod. In the interest of making the most of our short time together, I'm going to begin with a round robin question that I'd like each of you to respond to in turn. I then have some specific questions to ask each of you about your wonderful finalist book. So reading all of your books, I was so completely taken by how each of you just were so able to capture the voice and perspective of a child. I was hoping to hear how you each went about crafting and creating the tone and personality of your main character in a way that feels so authentic and relatable to kids. How much did you draw on your own memories and feelings as a child versus who you currently are as an author? Do you think strong ties to your younger self is key to being a successful children's book author? Karen, please let us know what you think.
Thanks, Cori. Yeah, my memories were a very important beginning point for Snow Steps. Much of my main character's action comes directly from my family's stories about what it was like that first winter we were here in America. But I think that my main character's feelings came from how I interpreted those stories as an adult. I don't think as a child I knew how to express what it felt like to be a new immigrant, but my actions spoke loudly. And so for me, it was a combination of the two when crafting my main character, examining those memories of my childhood, and then using my adult perspective to understand what they really meant.
Thank you so much, Karen. How about David? Would you like to talk a little bit about how you made such a playful book that really captures that kid-like personality? How much of that stems from who you were as a kid versus who you are currently as an author?
Well, Cori, many years ago, I was a fourth grade teacher. And when I was a fourth grade teacher, my mother always said that her son had never graduated from fourth grade, which is pretty true because I'm 64 years old now. I still love to pretend. I still love to play games. I still love to use my imagination. So in a lot of ways, I just have never grown up, which works well for being a children's author. It might not always work real well in handling practical matters in my life, but I can tie it with my writing. The other thing I think that has helped me a lot is, as I said, 30 some years ago, I was a fourth grade teacher, and I can imagine what it was like when I was having my students. And I visit many schools every year, lots and lots of classrooms, and that gives me a connection with kids, and I can see how they react to things and how, in a lot of ways, their personalities haven't changed that much over the year, that they still think a lot of the things are still funny. So I'm lucky I'm still about 10 years old in my mind.
Thank you, David. I think a lot of us, well, at least I know personally as an author, can very much relate to kind of sometimes still feeling like a 10-year-old. So thank you so much for sharing that with us. So Christina, would you please talk a little bit about how you created that character? How much of your childhood is in that little girl versus what was crafted today as the current author that you are?
For the main character, Maria, it's a little based off of me because I kind of really dug deep into how I felt. Really what guided me was my relationship with my grandfather, and that special connection between us kind of guided me through that, how I felt, how I thought it was just completely magical whenever he drew, and whenever we spent time together, it was just that magical, awesome time. So I drew a lot from that. And I also drew from the feeling of helplessness as a child, which I think is pretty universal when something happens in your family as a child. You don't know what is going on. You don't have the answers. You don't know what questions to ask. You don't know, how can I help? And I also kind of mind those feelings of how I felt. But I also balanced it out, was now as an adult, what do I want to tell children? What do I want to tell families when they're going through something like this? What do they need to know? What should they do? So I also wanted to focus on empowerment of what can a child do, that helplessness of going back and feeling I was helpless. I didn't know what to do. How could I help? And hopefully this is giving children some hope and empowerment and using their ingenuity and creativity, and however in their own little world they can help their ill loved one or their whole family in a challenging time. So it kind of went to what it was like when I was a child, and also now what do I want to say.
Thank you so much. So, hi, Kalia. Welcome. Would you like to speak a little bit about the rock in my throat and how your experiences actually being the child in this book helped you craft the story versus now being an adult and reflecting on that as an author?
The Rock in My Throat is a story that is really near and dear to me because it is a story of my life. I grew up as a selective mute in English. The first time I spoke to be heard was the launch date for The Late Homecomer. I was 27 years old, and I remember looking out and seeing some of my teachers, my elementary school teachers, in the audience, and some of them were weeping because they never heard my voice before, but they knew exactly who, because I didn't grow any taller, is the truth. And my hair was the same hair, and so they knew me, but they didn't know this voice coming forth from me. The image has stayed with me, Cori, across the years. I know that in America it takes an average of 5 years to write a book. And I know this will never happen again, but I wrote The Rock in My Throat in 1 hour. And it stayed essentially the same. Because I've been thinking about it so often. I've spent so much of my life thinking about this rock that's lived in my throat, this rock that I can still feel right now. And now I have enough power, enough wind to push through, but there is no guarantee that in the next 5 or 10 or how many ever years I have left that this rock won't grow so heavy again. I think especially with all of the forces of our world at work, it's hard. And my kids ask me, and all of these other readers of the book ask me, is the rock still there? And I have to be honest, yes. Sometimes it never goes away. There are moments in our life when we have enough power to push through, and then there are other moments in our life I can imagine so easily where the rock will roll back in its place. And so in these ways, I know exactly the feeling. The feeling is very familiar to me as an adult. There are still spaces in my life where that rock gets bigger and heavier. And so it's nothing new. But the ability to say, this is who I was, this is who I am, and this is who so many of us are, is so powerful. It is so empowering. You know, like David, young Kalia and 44-year-old Kalia are still very much intact. Somehow I made it to 44 without closing the windows and the doors. Young Kalia makes me possible every single day, with the energy level of my own children and with the energy level of the world around me, the world I choose to be surrounded by. I need young Kalia right beside me. And so in that way, there's always been a seamless relationship. We hold hands everywhere we go. And I think that helps me so much as a children's book author, because I don't have to access a different part of my head or my heart. It is the same piece of me. It is the only way I know how to meet the world genuinely and authentically. And that's what I try to do in all of my picture books, including in Bach. This little girl who lives underneath this lonely sky, who looks for beauty and finds it, and in the kindness of others, gets a gift of friendship.
Thank you so much. That was so beautiful. And I'm just so excited that you joined us. So I was actually hoping if you would be the first to answer one of the specific questions, because you were kind of leading into this. I think it is just a very tricky thing as an author to write a book that is both very intimate and so personal, yet is also very universal. And I was just curious if you could speak a little bit about, do you think a lot about all the people who will read your books? Is there a certain audience that you, I mean, I think you kind of touched on it, but a certain audience you would obviously hope find this book, and what you would like them to take from it? And as you're writing, how do you balance thinking about that audience versus trusting your own instinct? Does one seem to lead you more, or is it kind of a back and forth between that instinct and then thinking of the message you would like your readers to take in?
I love this question, Cori, and I think the honest answer. So the first time that I read it to a public audience was to a classroom of second graders at my neighborhood school. I live on the east side of St. Paul. It is the most demographically diverse sector of St. Paul, and it is also the poorest economic sector of St. Paul. I grew up on the east side, and I always thought as a kid, one day when I get old and if I make enough money, I'm going to move so far away from here, from this place where empty bottles roll down and break on sidewalks where children run and play. But then I got older and I had children and I thought about the east side and it was calling me, like this place where so many people are afraid. It made me who I am. And there I was surrounded by beautiful people too. And so I took my kids back to the east side of St. Paul to raise them. I'm only a mile away from the house where I grew up, the house that no longer exists. They tore it down. And the Jimmy Carter and Rosalind Carter project took it up, and all these churches came together, and it's like they built up a new house. And it's called the House of Faith, but that's 437 East York, my childhood home. So I'm close to it. But I came back here, and it was so important for me to come back here because I can still see myself on these streets, in all of these other bodies that run around its sidewalks. So I decided that I would try it out on the neighborhood school. So second grade classroom, I go in and I'm doing a reading from the book. And right when I'm done, a small hand shoots up into the air and I say, "Yes, you?" And this kid said to me, "Because of that book, there is one less lonely mother in the world. One less lonely mother in the world." And I said, "Yes." And she said, "I speak Spanish and English. My mother only speaks Spanish. And I see the way people walk away from her when she tries to talk. And it hurts me. And she sees that it hurts me, but we don't know what to say, how to say sorry." And so I'm going to I only had F and G's there. I didn't have the whole book, but every kid in the class got an F and G. And an F G is just final graphics. So you have final art, final writing for those who aren't in the book world. But she said, "I'm going to take this back and give it to my mother." And Cori, I was swept back in time. Picture books were never for children in my head because in the beginning, when I first came to America, my mother read picture books all the time to herself and to us. And I remember still, I was in fourth grade, the first time I corrected her on a word as she was reading. And she says to me, "Why don't you read it?" And so I just took up reading it, and my mother never read to me again. I just read her all of these books. And that was the beginning of everything. The beginning of everything. Could I have seen that girl in that classroom? Maybe my heart did, but I wasn't prepared. St. Paul Public Schools, they happened to be filming and my tears just started falling. So I know in my heart that these books will find the people who need them. In my head, I think it's important for me to be as welcome as I can be to any reader in the world who might need a book like that. Books are friends. Books are our friends. And books in that way have never discriminated. It's a question of accessibility, not a question of discrimination per se for me. And so, yeah, I try not to think too hard about a readership because so many writers get that question. But I am always humbled and taken aback by all the people who write me and who are impacted by the work. And those individuals I would not have been able to see, Cori. And I think that is the beauty, that is the magical part of why I keep on working on the page, because I can't see. And so there's this component that I know, and then there's this magic that awaits. And that is, within the covers of a book, but the world beyond it as well.
Very, very well said. And I think that maybe can be the important thing that we do leave on is to tell your story, be brave, because you truly never know the one person who needed to hear it. And then the trajectory or the, you know, can't think of the word, the cascade of stories, actions, and emotions that your story could start because we do need that right now. We do need more than ever that support and that bravery and that action. So thank you all so much. Thanks to our tremendous children's literature category finalists and to all of you watching for taking part in this Meet the Finalists panel. If you enjoyed this talk, you can find a treasure trove of past events archived on the YouTube channel of the Minnesota Book Awards steward organizations, the Friend of the St. Paul Public Library. You can find out more about future programs on their website, thefriends.org. In particular, mark your calendars for Tuesday, April 22nd. That's the evening that the winner in this category and 9 others will be finally revealed. Please join us in St. Paul at the Ordway Center for the Performing Arts. Tickets are $29, inclusive of processing fees. A free live stream will also be available. Visit thefriends.org/MNBA for details. And again, thanks so much for joining us.
Something a lot of people can relate to. But those stories from my childhood set in the snow and the cold of a Minnesota winter were part of my immigrant experience. And that's more of what I wanted to write about. What it's like from a child's perspective to be a new immigrant in America, not really understanding why you're here or why you left, and dealing with all kinds of changes all at once. I think we can hear a lot of negativity about immigrants here at times. And I wrote this story during one of those times to give a view into what it's really like to move to a new country, motivated by hope and filled with courage. It's not an easy path, and it takes a tenacious person to make it work. And I'm not sure that we hear enough about that. So I think it's important to share these perspectives and experiences with children to help build empathy and understanding for kids who may look or talk differently from them, and also for immigrant kids to see some of themselves in the stories that they're reading. And I've had people reach out to me too about, reading about pine tarts, which I mention in my story, and they've never seen that in a picture book before, or even just, reading about someone from. So I've loved hearing from readers who connect with the story, who have never seen that before. And I hope that Lakshmi's steps will help children understand a neighbor, a friend, and maybe themselves a little bit better.
Thank you, Karen. And again, what a great way to kind of expand on the topics we've already touched on, and just how important it is for all kids to see themselves in books, even grown-ups to see themselves in books, because it's such a great way to just build those bridges and not feel so alone in a world that sometimes feels very strange and lonely, which I can only imagine a Minnesota winter would be after being somewhere very warm. So thank you so much for sharing. Um, so Cristina, your book, What Lolo Wants, I noticed that you mentioned that you are also very curious in being an illustrator and not just an author. And clearly you're a very talented author. And so I was just curious, since you mentioned the book itself is about drawing and art. And so it made me think that maybe drawing and art is, of course, very important to you. But I just wondered if that made it harder then to have an illustrator create these images for you. Like, did you have to let go of certain things that were in your mind when you were creating this story? Or were you actually doing a lot of back and forth? Maybe not everyone knows, sometimes authors and illustrators talk a lot. And I know other times it's very limited. An author and illustrator might not speak at all. So I was just curious if you could discuss a little about kind of the imagery you pictured while writing What Lolo Wants, how you interacted with your illustrator, and then kind of your feelings on the final results, and how the book looks.
Actually, I've never met Jamie. I didn't get to connect with her until the book was almost out. I actually found her on social media. But while we were working on the book, I provided some notes. I had this vision, obviously, of what it was like. I really had to draw way back to my memories of what home was like in the Philippines, what it looked like, what it smelled like, what did I want to show, what did I want readers to feel. So I gave a few notes. I was very specific, for example, on the ice cream cart, because the ice cream cart in the Philippines is very specific to the Philippines. So I want to make sure that's correct. But it looks like she's from the Philippines, so she must know, but just in case, so I gave a picture. I'm like, this is the ice cream cart I really want. And so I also wanted to add textures that were like fabrics and textiles in the home that's unique to the Philippines, because I wanted that to be highlighted. Because this book, I started writing this book when I was in the MFAC program at Hamlin. This is my last semester. And growing up, I'd never seen those things, a Filipino main character in the book, the textiles, the surroundings, all these things. I've never seen them in a book. Honestly, it wasn't until I was in my late 40s that I actually saw myself in a book. I accidentally found Erin Entrada Kelly's book in the library, Blackbird Fly. I'm like, wow, a Filipino female author writing about us. And when I opened it, I saw myself in it. I'm like, oh my God, that's my mom. Oh my God, that's me. I need to tell my mom about this book. I saw myself, and the feeling that I got from that of being seen, that's what I wanted to recreate. I want someone to read my book, especially somebody who's a Filipino child, to go, oh my gosh, that's my Lolo. Oh my God, that's me. Oh my God, that's my Lola. That's what I wanted to recreate. I didn't want to give too much notes because I want artists to be free to be creative, wanting to draw myself and refine that art. I want that freedom. I want to give Jamie that freedom too. So I didn't give too much, just those little bit of things. And when I got the drafts back, oh my gosh, I had to hold my heart. I did. I had to hold my heart. And Katie Scott from Kids Can Press, my editor, emails me, what do you think? And I wrote back, I said, honestly, when I saw it, the first thing I thought of is I held my heart and I said the word home. And I get teary-eyed thinking about it right now, because I never thought that art could do that. I mean, I love art, but I never thought that this person, all the way back in the Philippines, could bring me home in her work. I've never been back since I left. So for her to do that, and I thought of the word home, really, it brought it home. And I told Katie, thank you. You found the best artist who could possibly bring the story to life. We picked the right person. We picked the right person. So I found her on social media, and now we connect. We're friends. We share each other. I'm like, hey, I found your book in this bookstore in the Philippines, and she, well, you know, and she was in Bologna at the book festival, and she'll send me pictures, and I'll send her pictures. So we've made this connection from here to the Philippines. We brought the Philippines in this book, and we brought it home. And home is the most important word I could possibly think of in describing that. So we know we did the right thing.
Thank you for such an honest answer. And I think we're all probably getting a little emotional. And what a testament to your words and ability to express what this book needed to be. Having illustrated many other people's books, I almost feel like that's what I look for, is what is that underlying vibe or tone that the author really wants to express. And I'm sure that Jamie knew right away that that feeling of home is what was shining through your words. And that is just amazing that she was able to do that. And again, I love when, you know, editors and art directors and teams just come together in the way that they're meant to be. And it's magic when both people just love the book to every level, know what it's supposed to be, and come from that same place of wanting to create that for the readers. So no, thank you. That was incredible. And I think is also a really great way to lead back to David. His illustrator is actually also a co-nominee, Mike Wohnoutka. He wasn't able to join us today, but I know David will speak for him. Their book together is Mr. Fox's Game of No. And it's a little bit different than the other books. It's an interactive book. It's kind of almost like a game. Well, I should say it is a game, a very fun game to play. And what I kept thinking about, David, was how did you come up with the questions that move the game forward? Was this all something you came up with on your own? I know you spoke about revisiting with kids a lot. You had been a teacher, and then obviously you also had Mike. Kind of, where did the final questions in the book that move the game forward come from? Were they you, kids, Mike, or kind of a mix of all of that? So if you would kind of speak about that, I would love to hear.
Well, first, I just want to say, Cristina, that was such a beautiful story you told about the power of a book to reach somebody else, and the power it had on you as well, too. That's just a lovely story. How could an author want anything more than to connect with their readers that way? And so that's just, thank you for sharing that. That was just beautiful. As far as the questions for Mr. Fox, for the most part, I came up with them myself. As you said, Cori, it's a game. I love to play games, and this is a game that you literally play with the book. And although I did not read the book to kids to get any ideas, I'm in a writing group that Mike is part of as well. And reading my books to them is just so crucial, especially if I'm trying to make it a funny book, to see how they react to it. So hearing the feedback from my writing group was very important. Usually I do not read my stories that I'm working on to students when I visit schools. One exception to that was I had a book called 100 Mighty Dragons, all named Broccoli. And at the end of the book, there's 100 baby dragons, and I needed to come up with 100 new names for those baby dragons. And when I was visiting schools, I would ask kids, oh, do you have a good suggestion for a dragon name? And the kids were very happy to do that. So they gave me lots of names. And I ended up using some of those names in the book. And it was so fun for me when I would revisit that school a couple of years later. I could say, Well, the kids who were in second grade 3 years ago, I used some of their names. So they were kind of the co-authors for this book. And I was able to meet some of those students whose names I actually used. And that was a lot of fun to do. So yeah, I guess I just came up with the questions myself, and it was a fun puzzle. I love puzzles as well as games. What is a new way in which I could trick the reader into saying yes? So I gave myself the challenge, and it was just a lot of fun.
Well, thank you, David. I guess I'm not surprised that you came up with all those silly questions on your own, but it still must have been really fun to see how Mike interpreted them all with his illustrations. Um,
And
so yeah,
that's an advantage of having worked with Mike. This is our 8th book together. I have complete confidence he's going to do a wonderful job with the illustrations. And as when I'm writing the stories, I can picture what Mike is going to do in my head. And that enhances my writing because I know, oh, Mike's going to make this animal look so funny, or he's going to do this with expression.
I did kind of wonder that too, since you have collaborated so many times, if there was almost just this unspoken knowing that he would just immediately get what you were doing or know how to represent it with a visual. So that must be amazing. I haven't gotten to do that yet, but I love that you guys have that relationship and get to make such fun books for all of us. Um, I was thinking, speaking, you were just speaking, David, a little bit about how you came up with the idea for the book and asked the kids for their feedback on your dragons. And so I was thinking of actually my second question for Karen and her book Snow Steps. Um, so again, this book is about a little girl who has moved from somewhere warm to somewhere very cold, and she doesn't want to walk in the snow. It's very scary. Again, kind of representing, I think, how she doesn't almost want to step into this new world. She misses her old home, the food, the climate, her friends. And I know, I'm sure we can all relate when you're writing a book. Sometimes the hardest thing is then figuring out how does your character end up changing? How do they evolve from being someone who's scared? How do you name a bunch of dragons? How do you evolve a character who's scared? There's always these things you need to figure out that are tricky. And so I was hoping, Karen, you could speak a little bit about um, how you got Lakshmi over this fear of stepping in the snow. Was that always your idea to have her see a kid who forgot their mittens, or was it kind of a challenging process to figure out how this kid who seemed so afraid to finally put those feet down into the snow?
Yeah, well, you picked it. That was the hardest part of the story to write. I didn't know how Lakshmi would take her first step in the snow. Um, and it did take time to really figure that out. It's not something that I could draw from my memories, unlike other parts of the stories, which are directly tied to my memories. Um, and then like early drafts were a little quieter for me. It was mostly Lakshmi just simply deciding to try, which is likely, what happened with me. Um, but I saw that the story needed more tension. And I also wanted to work in how a friendship can help you feel brave. Um, so through revisions and critiques, I found a way to make that turning point work for Lakshmi, but it wasn't an easy thing to write in an authentic way. It took some time.
So as authors, we all have many challenges figuring out how do we get through parts of our story? How do we get from the beginning to the end? How do we make sure we balance out, the fun parts with the parts that have a deeper meaning? And so Christina, in your book, What Lolo Wants, I mean, you touch on something very serious. I mean, my own grandfather had Alzheimer's. And so you have this kind of more serious topic of the main character Maria watching her grandfather lose his memory, but I still feel like the book overall has this kind of optimistic and playful feel. And I just was curious if you could speak a little bit about your writing process and how you thought about this more serious subject matter, but then also kept it in a way that, felt like kids could still access it. It was never heavy or overt. It was kind of just, what it was. So I was just curious if you could speak a little bit about your thoughts on yeah, memory loss and serious topics like that versus still keeping it um, a children's book and that kind of more playful element.
Um, I wanted it to be approachable. That's for sure. I don't want it to be heavy. At first, there's been numerous drafts. Like I said, I originally wrote this back in fall of 2018 on my last semester at Hamlin, and there were many iterations of it trying to get to the right feel of it. Or originally other drafts were like, should Maria know what it's called? Should grandma tell her that grandpa might not get better? How do I explain this? There were so many different versions of trying to get it to be an approachable story and trying to make it so that young readers would understand but still not be frightened of it, because we're all taught, I'm sure everybody here knows that we're all taught to write with hope. You always end your story with hope. And that's what I wanted to do, was wanted to give that. So it's not explained, it's not explicitly explained. I wanted it to be kind of understood, to hint it at, but I also wanted to focus on that the child still is able to be a child. She's still who she is. She's still having fun. She's still drawing. She's still approaching it in the way that a kid would think. And how can I help? I really wanted to focus on that. What can I do? And again, that empowerment, because when you're dealing with something so serious with a family member, children often feel helpless. I didn't have a lot of answers. Adults would often talk in hushed tones in a corner, talking about, and I don't know what they're talking about. I don't understand all these medical terms. And there's still that, I think it's a universal feeling of every kid wants to be able to help. What can I do? I don't know what's going on, but I want to help grandpa. How do I do this? And I wanted to focus on that. So there's been many drafts until I got to a part where I felt like it ends positively, ends with hope, and it ends with a focus, once again, bringing back to their relationship and how no matter what, that strong bond, that strong relationship within the family is what will keep you going. That's at the core, that's at the heart. The ending, it's interesting that it's gone through several iterations from agent to editor to everybody putting in their 2 cents. But the one thing that always never changed was the ending, which was, it was what Maria wanted too. Nobody ever touched it, because that's when I knew that ending was perfect. Again, it goes back to what she wanted, and what Lola wanted was just to be together. And that family dynamic and that relationship, that core bond, is what will get you through no matter what, no matter the challenges. Family together, you can weather anything. And that's what guided me from draft to draft until the finished product.
So thank you, Cristina. And thinking about kids and how they interact with books, David, if your cord is all set and everything, I was thinking of bringing it back to you, since your book is a straight up interactive book, an active game that kids can play as they go through it. And I was just wondering, since you were also a teacher, if you could just kind of talk about, were you meaning to create a book that makes kids feel empowered as readers? Even kids who can't read, I think, will feel like they're reading this book, because it asks again and again questions that they're going to want to say yes to, but they don't. And kind of just your thoughts behind creating this book in the way that it's set up, and then how you think it would help kids maybe be excited to read or feel empowered in the choices they can make, and kind of maybe going off of what we just heard Cristina say. Hopefully that makes sense, my question. And if it doesn't, just ask me to clarify more. But yeah.
I wish I had a deeper answer than I do, because I wrote the book just to make kids laugh. that was in the back of my mind. I wanted to make kids laugh. As far as making kids feel empowered to read, way back I wrote a book called Moo, and that was just like a one-word book, and that is what I was thinking about, that giving kids the opportunity that if they could read the word moo, they could read the whole book. And that has been very rewarding to hear all of the kids who speak no English, but they can get the same joke that everyone else in the class can, because everyone can read moo, everyone speaks moo. But with this book, I was just, as I said, trying to make them kids laugh. Especially recently, I've been trying to be more and more interactive with my books. A book that came out just before Mr. Fox was one called Go and Get with Rex. And this was another game book. It's another literal game, which was based on a game that I had invented for the people who are in my game group. So it's also a game that kids can play afterwards. They can go out and try to find things with the different letters and try hopefully do it in a creative way. And the next book that I'm working on now is just a very interactive book as well. I'm always trying to think of ways to connect with kids. Cristina and Karen and Kalia, they connect so well emotionally with their books, as they've all been discussing. And that's a wonderful way for kids can connect. They can either relate to the emotions, or someone in their family, they can relate to the emotions that person is having. But this book hopefully will make kids relate, because they actually draw in the book. It's called, a book that I'm illustrating as well as writing. Don't tell Mike that, because he doesn't need to know that I'm venturing into illustrating. But it comes with an eraser, and like there's one page where, you draw yourself on the pirate ship, and each of the pages you do that. So I'm always trying to find a new way to connect with kids, and the idea of having them answer the questions. As you said, they literally have to talk out loud to the book, and that's what I was thinking.
Yeah, no, exactly. Fair enough. I think anything that gets kids excited about interacting with a book is empowering. Makes them feel capable, makes them feel like they can, do something, be a part of it, even if they can't quite read yet. And of course, I think anything that makes kids laugh just usually gets them excited and wanting to maybe check out even more books. So I think getting kids excited and laughing is always a very important thing. So it doesn't matter if it's a very deep reason. I think it's one of the greatest things that we can do in life, right? Is laugh together.
I have such a very happy memory of reading with my father. My parents never read books to us. They always provided books, and we always went to the library, so that was fine. But my dad and I only read one book together, and that was Dr. Seuss's Fox and Socks, which is a tongue twister book. And my dad and I were reading it, and we were both laughing so hard that the tears were just running down our face. And that is such a nice memory to imagine when my dad came in from the garage and he asked what I was doing. And we read this book together. And 50 years later, or no, almost 60 years later, I remember that. And I've gotten some very nice feedback from both parents and teachers who've talked about they're thankful for the experience of all the laughing they did back and forth, either with their child or with the classroom, just laughing and laughing and laughing. And if I was able to do that, do something small to what like my dad and I experienced, that makes me really happy.
I think it's such a perfect way to kind of think about a lot of things we've talked about today, and just how I like to think about books is they are experiences, things we usually share with someone else, especially picture books. They tend to be read either a parent and a child or a classroom. And I do hope that it's always building memories and connections, which is going to thread us back to Kalia. We've talked a lot about immigrants coming, and David, you also spoke about the kids who might not know English still being able to read Moo, and just how it's just what do I want to say? Different languages are such an important part of who we are, being authors. And so, Kalia, I was just curious, as an author, someone who grew up learning more than one language, when you write, do you tend to write in one language versus the other? Do you go back and forth? Is it easier sometimes to describe things in Hmong, which is so much more poetic, just kind of the words you use in The Rock in My Throat to describe things like when your face was burning next to the plasma, or your mom's words were like sticky, like candy in her mouth. They're just like delightful to read. And I wondered how much of that stems from thinking about language more than someone like me who only grew up learning one, just like how knowing more than one language influences your writing as an author. And yeah, I guess just anything you want to share about your experience with that.
I love this question, Cori, because I've been thinking a lot about it. You know, President Trump wants to make English the official language of the United States of America. There's over 350 languages that live here. And when I write as a native Hmong speaker whose first language on the page is actually English, you know, in the refugee camps where I was born, I couldn't go to school, although I turned 6, because the schools are crowded. There were 40, 50,000 of us. And so I never had the opportunity to go to school. So my first encounter with the page then was in English, which is such an interesting dichotomy to have grown in such a rich Hmong world and then to suddenly look at a page and be working in entirely different the language. For me, it's such a beautiful thing. You know, Hmong people, when you really, really love someone, you sniff them and you take a piece of them inside your heart, right? The American context, a kiss is kind of like a rubbing of surfaces, right? And so it's entirely different ways of interacting with the world. For me, because I've been interpreting for my parents for a long, long time and translating for them, like so many children of immigrants and refugees, it comes so naturally. I'll hear it in one ear and then it'll filter out in a different way via usually my mouth because I'm always navigating and mediating languages. For me, sometimes I feel when I talk about like love or missing or yearning, if I feel it first in Hmong. It comes to me in Hmong. When I'm very angry or when I've been hurt, usually the response is English. You know, and so in that moment of humiliation, when that young Kalia can't speak and she's in a position where everybody knows she can't speak, I wanted, and I don't know if you have either, but there have been many times in my life where I just wanted the floor to open up and swallow me down, to take me as deep as possible, and the deepest place was the core of the earth. Not because I wanted to die, you know, going under, especially in the Hmong cosmology, is generally when we die, uh, but because a part of me dies a little bit every time, you know, and then I have to somehow emerge again, you know, and this young Kalia loved finding feathers on the ground or shiny pieces of tiny, you know, rock to watch it glitter in the sunshine, to search for life again, to hold on to that beauty for all of those moments when you are rendered so incredibly vulnerable by the things that you cannot do, the forces that are so much bigger than yourself. That was very much English, very, very English. The moment where Julia Chang comes in, she says, "Do you want to be my friend?" Oh, my heart felt it in Hmong. "Có pasao ko the punya?" Do you want to be my friend? My heart felt it in Hmong, but the thing between us was she spoken in English. Do you want to be my friend? You know, and that's kind of where the book ends. And it isn't until the back matter that you find out that the girls ultimately become friends. First, because of the letters that they write to each other, right? Which is so much my relationship with the language. I fell in love with an English that was patient, that could wait for me on the pages. And so every time I write, I'm reminded of why I love this language, why I live in it equally. I live in Hmong and I live in English, and these things are okay. But I transition emotionally between the two languages in everything I do. And I think that's why my relationship to the page is the way it is, why my relationship to the spoken word is the way it is. I come from an oral tradition, you know, words had to write on memory. We didn't have the benefit of paper and books. And so I think, what do I want to write with the winds of my words? I think, okay, the whole world is listening now. What do you want to say on that page? But yeah, you're absolutely right, Cori. So much of my relationship is to language at large is founded by these forces that have made me who I am. You know, and when you grow up in a refugee kid, you're not identified as international, but of course you are, because there were, you know, NGOs from all around the world working. And so even though Hmong was the language of my home, all around me I heard the languages of the world being spoken around me. And in that mix, that's where I find myself. You know, we watch Bollywood on TV. You know, we watch, you know, the great Chinese cinema in Hong Kong. All of these influences have made me who I am. And in my book, I try to communicate that in a variety of ways, but always to be true to the fact that no language lives entirely by itself. And it shouldn't be that way. You know, I think there was a reason why we never had an official language. It was to give us room to be with each other in our authentic selves, as we needed to be, to say, you belong because you belong to each other. And you know, and so the question has been really top of mind, particularly this week, but always it's been a factor in my life.
Very, very well said. And I think that maybe can be the important thing that we do leave on is to tell your story, be brave, because you truly never know the one person who needed to hear it. And then the trajectory or the, you know, can't think of the word, the cascade of stories, actions, and emotions that your story could start, because we do need that right now. We do need more than ever that support and that bravery and that action. So thank you all so much. Thanks to our tremendous children's literature category finalists and to all of you watching for taking part in this Meet the Finalists panel. If you enjoyed this talk, you can find a treasure trove of past events archived on the YouTube channel of the Minnesota Book Awards steward organizations, the Friend of the St. Paul Public Library. You can find out more about future programs on their website, thefriends.org. In particular, mark your calendars for Tuesday, April 22nd. That's the evening that the winner in this category and 9 others will be finally revealed. Please join us in St. Paul at the Ordway Center for the Performing Arts. Tickets are $29, inclusive of processing fees. A free live stream will also be available. Visit thefriends.org/MNBA for details. And again, thanks so much for joining us.